Yeah, g'day TryPod family. Welcome back to the TryPod Live with Winnie and Clarkey. We're here with you for the next hour to preview everything round two, give you our betting breakdown for each game, and of course, the great man's going to have some best bets. On that note, Winnie, Clarkey's collect bangs at $2.26, which puts me slightly in profit after two rounds, having lost the first round. Mate, how are the best bets tracking for you in 2025?
I would be slightly in profit if the two best bets I gave out a week ago were both counted in the record, but I'll get to that. I went 1-0 over the weekend, really, with my only bet that I'm counting being Bulldogs minus 3.5, who were up 22 points, but held on 1 by 6. So we covered the line with the Dogs. I gave out another great winner, neither team to 25 in Dolphins Souths, and it was 16-14. But then we had that confusion, as people might recall, 7 days ago. The game changed venue while we were live. I thought that would void the bet instantly, and I thought that's bad luck by me. It's going to be voided. I thought it was a good tip. Actually, people said Sportsbet kept it, that one of their rules is that venue change does not void the result. So everyone who jumped on, including a lot of people that got $2.40, had a winner. But because I said from that point onwards, I assumed it would void and don't back it because you've lost the advantage of the wet weather that was predicted, some people got it and won, some people didn't. So I haven't counted as a winner, but I do want to say I would have counted it as a loss if it lost, because some people were on it. So I just asked the question to the followers, how many shows or services keep a strict long-term record on their tips against the betting odds at all? But how many would mark themselves so harshly like I did, where despite doing my job sharing a great pick, I had no upside when it jumped due to circumstances outside of my control. And imagine if best bets miss profit by 1 unit this year. That could cost the future of the TryPod, but such is my respect for the audience, mate, that they come first.
Yeah, mate, you keep it real, you keep a record, and I think that's probably the most impressive thing I feel. You know, a lot of people love to share their wins and boast about the wins on social media, and it is fun, don't get me wrong. But to have, you know, a record that is tracked over 10 years now, I think that's really commendable, man. Now, we will get into the show in a moment, but you have a special segment and topic you want to talk about, so I'll let you open up the floor with that.
So what I actually want to do, I want to talk Dylan Brown, and I want to ask people, how many players would you rather have than Dylan Brown for the next 10 years? But I'll give you the best bets first, because that's a bonus segment. I also just want to talk about round one, just saying the biggest challenge going into round two is trying to figure out what was real and what was just more of a flash in the pan, what was just a nightmare day out or a red hot day out for sides. That's what we've got to be able to judge going into the second matches for these teams. And of course, we've already done the live recap show, so we're not going to go in depth in how every game played out. We've had the opportunity to say our piece. And if this pod leaves you wanting more, if it's not long enough for you, as some people say, go back and listen to the recap, because you'll get a bit more out of how we assessed every team's performance. However, we did jump early on Sunday. We didn't touch on Storm Eels. What I'll say is I was close to the minus 15.5 a week ago. The Moses News caught us a bit by surprise. But equally, I'll admit, when I was close to a loser, I would have shared Storm to win both halves as a best bet if I could find it above $1.80. I looked at every bookie, and some of them didn't have that market up yet. And I reckon if they'd all been up, I reckon someone would have had that $1.80 or better, and I would have played Storm win both halves. It's 46-6 at halftime, and Parramatta actually wins the second half by 2 points. So that would have been some sort of sick beat. Clarkey, a word from you on that game where the history books look to be in jeopardy after the first 40.
Yeah, I thought for this Melbourne Storm in that game, absolutely impeccable. Craig Bellamy just has something in the water in Melbourne, that his pre-seasons are so tough and so precise in everything that he does, that this Melbourne Storm always hit the ground ready to go. And so there's no question marks for the Melbourne Storm. We all acknowledge exactly where they're at as a club. We thought they were premiership contenders coming into the season, and I'm sure everyone still feels that way. But when you look across the fence to the Parramatta Eels, unfortunately to say for Eels fans, and I was one before the Titans came in the competition, it is very classic that after one round, we have more question marks than we do answers about this side. Does Mitchell Moses coming back and give them an immediate boost of confidence? We don't know. Do they need to make some changes to their squad? Clearly they do. They've made them now. Will that work? We don't know. And then on top of it all, Winnie, once you've thrown all those questions, if you're an Eels fan and you can finally get past those, your other half, Dylan Brown, goes and leaves on the eve of round 2. So a lot of question marks for the Eels right now. And in my humble opinion, they are staring down the barrel of another difficult season. I'm not going to say they're there yet because it is only round 1, but they're staring down the barrel and they need to change. Something needs to change really quick, and they need to find some answers for all of those question marks over the squad at the moment. Would you agree with that?
Well, you'd hate to have picked Eels top 4, which I may have before the
I did it last year
Moses
as well,
years.
mate.
And look, never expected the win in Melbourne, so they've got the same number of points as I thought going into round 2. Unfortunately, Moses is out 6 weeks, not just 1. We'll get to all that because Para plays again this week. I would actually say, well, Para's in the most competitive game of round 2, and we've got to talk Dylan Brown when the largest contract in rugby league history gets dealt out. It's a great topic of discussion. That could be a whole pod. We'll just try and condense it into a segment, and I want to share my angle. But best bets, we're already a minute overdue. I'll make it quick and more in depth when we get game by game. I am going on the New Zealand Warriors, and I will take them in the first half plus 4.5 at $1.88 hosting Manly. It's one of the biggest contrasts in displays from the first game, where New Zealand couldn't have looked worse. Manly arguably couldn't have looked better. I think this game will be a lot closer. I think both games sort of got out of hand, and both games are not consistent displays of what these sides are made of. And in a home opener where I do think there's an advantage to the New Zealand forward pack that is going to want to make a statement, I think I'm a little bit worried about how Manly can execute and how the speed can hurt you at the end of halves. I don't have to worry about the second half, but I'm brave enough to take the first half line plus 4.5. And then going all the way through, the next and final best bet I could find for this round involves your Titans against the Bulldogs, but it's going to be a total bet. Under 46.5, Bulldogs, Titans at $1.90 on Sportsbet. The Dogs' identity, though they did put on a pack of points against the Dragons, the Dogs' identity is defense. The line speed is going to restrict the space that the Titans want to work with. The Titans have got a new halves combination, and I think the Titans want to establish some form of toughness and start the season with determination. And I think that can be a decent game of footy to conclude the round. But because I don't have a great amount of confidence in the Titans laying on points at Belmore against a really strong defensive outfit, I'm going to prefer to play unders as a proxy for a decent game. That's a pretty big total this early in the year.
Yeah, I just scrolled through my notes while you were there. I'm pretty much with you on both of those in terms of how I'm seeing those games. So we'll get more specific and add additional context when we get to each game. But yeah, certainly early days suggest that we're pretty aligned in how we're seeing both of those games as well. So I do like both of those best bets, mate. Alrighty, over to Dylan Brown. Did you want to set the scene? And then you tell me where you're going with this, and I'll tell you which players I would prefer on a 10-year deal as opposed to Dylan Brown.
Okay, Dylan Brown gets a 10-year, $13 million deal from the Knights. So that's 1.3 a season. If the salary cap goes up, he can actually get a little bump. We've heard of the ratchet clause, but nothing too major. Highest he could make would be 1.4 a season. So the contract could be worth $13.5 million over 10 years. The cap will go up, I'm sure. And that is an important factor when you try and assess the value of this contract. It's going to put the Knights in a tough position towards the back end for sure. Newcastle's going to have the 2 highest paid players in the comp. But if the salary cap does go up 30 to 40% in the next few years as predicted, then a $1.3 million a year player is at least only equivalent to a $1 million a year player now. That's still a lot. And it's definitely an overpay by Newcastle, which everyone agrees. Some criticizing Dylan Brown himself. I say there's nothing to criticize the player for. It's not his fault that he got offered the biggest contract in history. And he doesn't owe the Eels anything in terms of, well, he's had a colourful past there and there's been development put into him, but you can't begrudge a player taking a deal like that. So, no surprise, and well done to Dylan Brown and his agents, honestly. My biggest point was I'm sure the Knights could have offered a bit less and still got him. You put 7 figures in front of Dylan Brown, I'm talking 10 million, and maybe it's more like 8 years, and you just get off the most devastating years of the contract because it's unlikely a 34-year-old Dylan Brown is going to be worth that amount of money. And it's still an overpay, but it's a little bit more reasonable. So I feel like the Knights have paid too much. But that got me thinking, how many players would you shell that money out for? How many players are worth mega dollars for 10 years? We've seen a handful of these examples in the past. DCE, you'd say that worked out, though Manly hasn't won a comp under that contract with DCE. Jason Taumalolo, I would say that was in the players' favour. Tino, the worst possible start for your Titans when he did his ACL first year, right? So it's very dangerous for obvious reasons, giving out these big contracts. There's only a handful of players you would want to entertain the thought. And for me, it's got to be someone young. It's got to be an influential position, and probably not a forward, I would say, because of the physical toll that it takes. And I don't think forwards' primes can last as long into their 30s as what playmakers can. So I said to you, I don't think this deal is as bad as some are suggesting, because I reckon there are only a handful of players I would take ahead of Dylan Brown over the next 10 years. You thought there actually is more than a handful. What would you like to say about the whole scenario?
Yeah, well, I suppose quickly, well done to Dylan Brown's manager. The last time we saw a deal this great was the Lakers management. And if you guys are NBA fans, getting rid of AD to get Luka in, that's what his manager has done here, the equivalent of. That is a fantastic deal for a player that realistically, besides achieving a grand final and a Pacific Championship win with the Kiwis, hasn't performed to a consistent standard in the NRL. And that's not my opinion. That's his own opinion. He said that after the 2022 and 2024 season, his words were shit. He said my season was shit. So that's not my words, that's his. He believes himself he's been inconsistent. Second of all, I feel for the Eels here, and I wish the NRL had a system in place in which it rewards clubs for developing players. Now, they identified him as a 15-year-old in New Zealand. They brought him over for Harold Matthews. They put him through SG Ball, Jersey Flag, all the way up to debuting in the NRL. And what do the Eels get for it? They stood through him through multiple controversies, which we won't get into. But I do feel for the Eels here. I wish there was something in place where the NRL could chip in money outside of the salary cap, because they can genuinely recognise you did go to all the lengths to develop that player, and it's not fair to see them immediately come in and poached. But that also goes against the very principle of the NRL salary cap as well. Now, in terms of the money he received, Winnie, that list shortens. I wouldn't sign too many players on around $1 million for 10 years. But if you want players right now that I would sign on a 10-year deal ahead of Dylan Brown, and you add the context of how much they've signed him for and how much you could probably get these players for, I have a list of 30. I've got 30 players that if they were more closer to their market value.
When you take in context of money, don't throw names at me and say, I picked this guy over Brown because he would be cheaper. Just tell me, if it wasn't money, and you could have anyone in the NRL at the Titans for 10 years, how many guys are ahead of Dylan Brown?
Okay, I'll go through my list. Lachlan Galvin, Keanu Kinney. I would take Sam Walker, Reece Walsh, Tom Dearden, the Hammer. Matt Burton, maybe no. Stephen Crichton, Tino, possibly Terrell May, Kalen Ponga, and Payne Haas. So there's 10 there. And all those players, I think.
Terrell May stood out to me.
Yeah, he's only like 24 or 25 max, and he's solid.
So what, is Terrell May the best prop in the competition?
He could be close to it by the end of the year from what I've seen early days.
To me, that's just my personal opinion, that I wouldn't sign a forward, because the physical brand I talked about before, you really get into your 30s and mid-30s, and none of these forwards, especially middles, dominate the game. And I wouldn't pay an edge forward because they don't have as great an influence on the game. I'm not going to pay an outside back. So to me, it had to be a fullback, a 5'8", or a halfback, potentially a hooker. I had some of the names. The guys I thought who I would take. Did you say Nathan Cleary? I would take Cleary.
Is he 28 now or 27?
Cleary's 27. To me, you get his professionalism. You get enough good years out of Cleary that even if he's not great at 36, 37, he's the best we've ever seen. So I think Cleary, you take him, right? But for example, Moses is a better player than Dylan Brown, but Moses is 30. For the next 10 years, I want Brown. Walsh, 22 years old, agree, take him. Sam Walker, 22, agree. He'd be one of the top assets in the whole league. I even reckon Ponga debatable at 26, because Ponga's a better player than Dylan Brown. The Knights already have him. Agree with you, the Hammer. I wasn't going to take Stephen Crichton because I thought I can't justify a centre. But then I thought, well, if it was my team, I'd play Crichton at fullback. I have him a similar level to the Hammer. That's my 6 that'll go before Brown. You mentioned Matt Burton. He is 24. I would have him right on par. I think those are very equivalent players. And Burton's got the better kicking game and kicks goals, but Brown may have the better running game. I heard people mention Dearden. I think you did too. He's 23. I have him also similar level to Brown. I actually prefer Dylan Brown, but I understand others would like Dearden. I should preface this and say I'm really high on Dylan Brown. I think defensively he's everywhere, and he has potential to actually play at a higher level than what we've seen. Payne Haas, at 25 years old, did you mention him as well? I know many others did. You'd rather have him at your club for 10 years. I respect that. I think that's a borderline one for me. I'm just not going to pick a prop that gets through the work he does because, like we saw with Taumalolo, most damaging forward in the comp, and then signs a mega deal 2 or 3 years later, he's not even starting type thing. Someone mentioned Isaiah Katoa. I would just say jury's still out for me. I really like him. He's 21, but I'd want to see a bit more. Lachlan Galvin is 19. If you prefer Lachlan Galvin from 19 to 29 instead of Dylan Brown from 24 to 34, I can't argue with you, but it goes back to how much confidence do you have in Galvin? Because Luke Brooks burst on the scene at the Tigers a long time ago, highly touted. It doesn't always pan out. Not saying it won't. I think that's a fair argument. Harry Grant is 27. He's the only hooker. I thought, for 10 years, you could imagine Harry Grant having a prolonged career, but that's a questionable one. Someone else mentioned, I think it was Padonna said Ezra Mam, but you sort of want to see how he responds from the ordeal he's been through. But Ezra Mam's only 22, plays the same position as Dylan Brown. That's a fair argument. I couldn't have Tino off an ACL. And again, it's more going to he's not the best player in the comp at his position and he plays such a physical brand. I worry about longevity. I hated the deal the Titans gave him a year ago. Cam Murray, 27, same issue, off Achilles now. I saw people throw names like Jerome Hughes, Munster, Moses, Luai, Hines. They're all too old for a 10. If it's a 5-year deal, different argument. And same issue for Latrell, Turbo, Pappy. They've had injuries, late 20s. So that's my justification that I actually think it's a short list. And you've heard me say I would have only 6 players probably ahead of Brown for the next 10 years. It's a guessing game, of course. You've got to make a lot of projections about what players are going to be, and it does change quickly. But the deal might not end up that bad for Newcastle. If you sort of think of it like Jackson Hastings is there on 800K doing nothing. You get Dylan Brown for 1.3. It's going to make the roster quite thin around those 2 players, which is going to create a team a little bit like a Manly scenario. And we haven't seen Manly get over the hump. But it's an all-in move by Newcastle. It could be really rough at the back end of that Brown contract, and we don't know what Ponga does in 29 when he's off. And I saw a comment about All Blacks, but I would say Knights fans, it's not all doom and gloom, although everyone agrees you've paid above value and you basically can't get value out of this because he needs to be the best player in the comp to play up to the value. So it's hard to, get a great return on that contract. But if you're a contender in the next 3 or 4 years, and if you could win a competition, it would be worth it. And I've heard other people knocking Brown like he hasn't dominated Origin like others have. It's not his fault. He's a Kiwi. He's beaten Australia. And the fact that he's a Kiwi, he doesn't play Origin, is actually an advantage to you through the year. You don't get that disruption and that wear and tear. So, and going back to my original point, the cap will continue to go up. 1.3 won't look as bad on the books. It's not, and he is only 24, and I think he will actually go a couple levels. I actually think he is capable of playing halfback like a Jerome Hughes did, like a Nico Hines that were predominantly running players. I don't think it's a total disaster for Newcastle, and I don't have many players I'd rather have. And one of them is already on the Knights, as I said before, Ponga. So that's my opinion. I know it's probably a bit bold, but it's out there now for anyone else to pick apart. And please let us know what you think, guys.
Yeah, and let me tie a bow on this, I suppose, for my final points. To me, the best duos in rugby league are typically a Batman and a Robin, and the salary cap reflects that as well. Nathan Cleary was on more than Jerome Luai. Andrew Johns was on more than his brother. Michael Morgan was on less than Jonathan Thurston, and the list goes on, etc., etc. But the Knights here have 2 Batmans, and I don't mean that in terms of their play style. I mean that in terms of how much salary cap is allocated toward the 2 players. So that is another concern for them. But overall, winning everything we just discussed, ultimately, it's all just theories, because at the end of the day, a player of Dylan Brown's caliber or anyone else we discussed that we would have above him, they ain't coming on the open market to sign for a 10-year deal. You're not going to get that opportunity to sign Tom Dearden, Nathan Cleary, Stephen Crichton, etc. The clubs are too diligent to allow that to occur. So Knights had an opportunity to secure an elite playmaker. They did as much. So whilst people can say, I would prefer players like Jonah Pezzett, I saw someone say, and some up-and-coming guys, they want to win now. And if you want to win now, you've got to get the best players available. And Dylan Brown was the best player available. So we will eagerly await and see how this one pans out from 2026 onwards. Alrighty, guys, we've got 8 games to preview for you all. We will get to that in just one moment. Before we do, let us hear from our favourite CEO. It's Mr. Tristan Merlehan from Top Sport.
G'day everyone, it's Tristan here from Top Sport, and it was an interesting part 2 of round 1 where the punters actually really got the better of us. Just probably on the 2 lopsided games. Obviously that's when the same game multis really take over. We had a customer open up his account. His first bet was a $200 same game multi that lobbed at 300 to 1, and he collected 60,000. So congrats, a brilliant bet. That was in the Melbourne Storm Parramatta game and involved every try scorer, which obviously plenty lobbed, and then Pappy to score twice. So great effort, but those are the games that are bookies' nightmares, especially early in the season. So punters way too good in the week just gone. Just having a look at the teams, I think the biggest changes in our power rankings were Manly were very, very impressive, and the Cowboys weren't. So that was a big change. Obviously the Roosters have been downgraded. Parramatta somewhat, although they were missing a few players, and obviously we know how good the Storm are. So they were probably the biggest ebbs and flows over the course of the weekend. Just having a look at the week coming up, the biggest move by a significant margin is at the team playing that Roosters side, where Penrith have gone from minus 16.5 out to minus 21.5. So obviously a massive move there to start the week. Broncos were way too good for the Roosters. Penrith were Penrith, and assuming they come back from Vegas all right, they should be winning this game quite comfortably, but that's a pretty big line now. So good luck to everyone having a bet over the weekend, and of course gamble responsibly.
Great stuff from Tristan. As always, appreciate his insights. And let's move into the games, Winnie. Game 1, we've got the Knights hosting the Dolphins Thursday at 8 p.m. at McDonald Jones Stadium. The line was minus 3.5 against the Knights. It's moved slightly to 4.5. Adam Elliott does return for them via the bench. For the Dolphins, they'll be without Fini Fuiaki and Kaneli Lemuemu. Cody Nikorima and Mark Nichols do return for them. The Knights went 2-0 over the Dolphins last year, and they have opened as slight favourites. But Winnie, I don't mind the Dolphins here for an upset. The thing that kind of disturbs that, though, is, again, their preparation is disrupted as they can't train locally. They've had to get a flight to Newcastle early. So how do you view their chances when you break this one down?
Yeah, it's a rough start to the year with the disruption. You got 2 teams that both played away on Friday night. Both played games decided by 2 points, that it was the Knights on the right side of the result, as they were in NRL Finals Week 0 last year at McDonald Jones. If people recall the final regular season game, the Knights were victorious to stamp a top 8 ticket. Elliott, nice inclusion for Newcastle, and the Finns lose 2 edge forwards in Lemuelu and Fini Fuiaki, as you said. I lean Finns with the line at 4.5. You feel early in the year there's still the depth to cover a couple of outs. You can definitely talk about, the team that lost versus the team that won. Is there a little bit more desperation? But that's more of a factor to me when you get to like 0-2, where losing 3 in a row is nearly a death sentence. I feel like both sides are going to be pretty motivated to win, especially the Knights in front of the home faithful. Saifidi returned to the Hunter. I'm sure he'll be up for a big game personally, Daniel. And then you got the fullbacks, which is the reason to tune in for this one, worth the price of admission. 2 guys who we both agreed are among the greatest assets in the competition for the next 10 years, KP versus the Hammer. At least the Dolphins get to pick their first choice halves again. I think that actually gives a playmaking edge to my Finns. But with the defensive resilience that the Knights showed, I know it was an understrength Tigers, but I respect that right now the Knights are a slightly better team and they're at home. I thought the line should be 3.5. It's a lean at 4.5, but not quite a play.
For me, when I break this one down, I think it's a bit of an adjustment game again for the Dolphins here, in the sense that Nikorima comes back into their spine. Yes, they've trained in the preseason, but it's another disruption there with Sean O'Sullivan there last week. Whereas for the Knights, as clunky and as critical as I've been of their spine last round against the Tigers, I don't think the Tigers were that great defensively. I think it was a very disconnected spine effort from the Knights. I am prepared to give them a pass for the wet weather and the fact it was the opening round. I think they'll be better for that run. And for that reason, I do expect their spine to connect just a little bit better. I thought individually players were good, Ponga and Fletcher Sharp, but they just weren't connecting as well. With that run, I think they can connect a little bit better. The Knights have won 7 of their 12 home games last year, and the first home game of a year for any side really is an important one. This is one that coaches do drum up. Let's win it for the fans. Let's show we mean business this year. And it does really set the tone for the rest of your year at home. The Knights have had some really poor runs at home in the 2023 season and going back. So they'll want to make this a fortress again this year, like they did last year, winning 7 of their 12. My prediction here is Knights. I liked the line more when it was -3.5 winning by just an unconverted try. Now it's at 4.5. If I couldn't get 3.5, I'd probably stay off, which I suppose shows that I'm not too strong on that tip. But if I had to lean, I would say the Knights get the job done here. Alrighty, game 2. Warriors host Manly Friday, 6 p.m. We're at Go Media Stadium in Auckland. This line was -7.5 against Manly. It has moved to -8.5. No changes for the Warriors lineup. However, for Manly, Josh Aloiai comes in and Suya Takiaho is out. Now, these sides met twice last year, Winnie. They drew on the first occasion, and Manly won the next one by 14. Adding on to that, Manly have not lost to the Warriors in their past 6 encounters. So can you see a world where the Warriors turn their fortunes at home here in line with your best bet?
Yeah, I can. I know that the Warriors could not have looked worse in Vegas, and then Manly were scorching hot at 4 Pines Park on Saturday night. And I also recall that corresponding fixture, 90-minute draw we had a year ago, and it was New Zealand that was about a 7-point favourite going into that one. This is the first Vegas team we get to watch on home soil or in the Southern Hemisphere. Last year, they made the Vegas sides rematch, so there'd be no advantage or disadvantage. So it'll be interesting to see how that pans out for the Warriors. But ultimately, 12 days prep should suffice and coming back home. Now, Webster shows faith in the same 17 players in same positions, but is that blind faith for the Warriors? That's the question. I was doubtful in the season prediction about where the points are coming from for the Warriors this year, but I was still stunned at how impotent the attack was and lacking direction in Vegas. I don't believe CHT and Metcalf at 7. I don't believe that halves pairing is the right combination. Roger, I think, is wasted on the wing. CNK doesn't offer enough in attack. And yet, I'm still going to back the Warriors here because at home, with the 2 weeks to stew off laying that egg at Allegiant Stadium, I do anticipate we get a side that's locked in, that will get on the front foot, because I think you can punch holes in Manly if your forwards can aim up, and that has to be the strength, the front line for the Warriors, which can then open up opportunities for New Zealand. And I can't knock Manly based on what we saw in game 1. So this isn't as much a bet against Manly, more of a bet on the bounce back factor for the Warriors. If there's a detraction to be made of the Seagulls, it would be that the Cowboys were so bad and basically gave up after 10 minutes when it was 16-0. Manly did it easy and looked too good and not realistically what they will be in a more competitive match. I'm wary of DC's just total control of a game and how potent Manly can be when they get momentum. If I take the second 40 out of the game where there's more fatigue, I don't have to worry about that. And so I think this one can play out close, and it's just going to be a stark contrast to each of these sides' first hitouts, in my opinion.
Here's the thing, Whitty. When coaches talk about performing in games, it all comes back to preparation through the week, intent, focused. Reports have come out since that the Warriors were all on the pokies, having beers and having a good time throughout the Vegas week. I don't blame them. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Let it rip, guys. And unfortunately, it potentially did affect their preparation for the game, and that's fine for me. Now, I did note after that game that the Warriors' issues in attack didn't run too deep for me. I thought they could correct them pretty quickly. I just think that their forward pack wasn't going forward enough, and I think the halves played a little bit too horizontally, left to right, not digging into the line enough. And I do think that if they make those small tweaks, they can recover here really quickly. The reason why I'm not going to quite tip them for a win here is this Manly side is red hot. They are brimming with confidence after round 1, and they're probably not the right side for the Warriors to bounce back enough. But I do think this Warriors side can improve and make it a difficult win for the Sea Eagles. I ultimately just see the Seagulls having a little bit too many points in them. When the game's on the line and it's a tight one and there's a try in it either way, I'm going to back Manly's backline over the Warriors' backline for all the reasons you said as well. Now, the Warriors were 4 from 10 at Auckland last season, so it's not quite a formidable home record, you'd have to say. All things considered, my prediction for this one, I'm going to go Manly 1-12. I think we'll see a slight come down from what we saw from them last week, and I think we'll see a considerable improvement from the Warriors. I just don't think that improvement's going to be quite enough to get over this Manly side. So Manly 1-12 will be my prediction for that game. And Ryan seems to agree. I just saw his comment roll through Manly by 4-ish. Yeah, I think it'll be tight. Game 3. Now, this one will not be tight. We've got the Panthers hosting the Roosters Friday, 8 p.m. We're at CommBank Stadium. Now, the line was minus 16.5 against Penrith. I was cautious to touch that. It's now moved to minus 21.5, and that was as of an hour or two ago, so it could have moved further from there, guys. For the Panthers, Brian To'o returns, and Casey McLean overcomes his concussion to return. For the Roosters, they are without Victor Radley, so Makahesi Makatoa debuts on their bench. All right, Winnie, these two sides, they met twice last year. The Panthers claimed victories in both. But to add to that, the Panthers have actually won their last 10 in a row over the Roosters, who, in my opinion, have made a real habit of coming up short in big games. Think Penrith, think Storm. They haven't really been able to get it over them in recent years. And for me, with where they're at right now, it is tough to see them bounce back in this game. Would you agree with that?
That wasn't a forward pass in the finals game, man. The Roosters were coming back. Remember that cost me my best bet?
Yeah.
No, that record is no joke. And that was actually when the Roosters had some stronger rosters that went on to make top 4, let alone who's lining up in this one on Friday night. It's similar to the previous Friday game in terms of two teams at the opposite end of the spectrum in terms of ability shown in round 1. The Panthers were so sharp against the Sharks, and I thought that was a really strong Sharks outfit. And you get even stronger when To'o comes in, not to mention Henry could be back off the bench. Talangi's shoulder must not quite be right, but there's no rush there. And the Chooks lose Radley. Lenu still suspended. Butcher Brothers remain out. It's a very new look side. You know the Panthers will want to assert some dominance in their new temporary home. And after looking so slick in round 1, where I questioned how many weeks it would take the 4-time premiers to get through their gears, they're already ahead of schedule in terms of where I thought this team might build up to. And then you've got a Roosters side that was beaten up front by Brisbane. There's no reason to expect any different when you look at the Panthers roster. I know Robinson's going to hope his Chooks can stay a little better connected than Thursday night where Brisbane tore them apart like soft bread, but Penrith will do the same if they get the front foot and if they get good ball. The issue is, so Penrith's the side for me. The issue is I can't lay 20 points at this point in time because I've missed the boat on earlier lines where the look ahead was 9.5, then I think adjusted to 13.5 soon after the Roosters got pumped. And it's just continued to climb. As Tristan mentioned, and how about that same game where he said someone winning 60 grand on their first bet? You don't even need to know what the multi was. You can pretty much imagine it because just about everybody scored for Melbourne. But you even go back to the Gillaroos game in Vegas, and then the Broncos, a popular team. Manly, popular for same game as all the scorers that we mentioned. Turbo was one of the few who didn't. And then Melbourne rounds it out. The punters will be circling this game. It'll be take your pick for try scorers, and you just got to hope they all salute, and that's going to be the way everyone probably plays this. And I just wonder how the bookies are going to try and counteract that by how short some of these player anytime tries will be. No play for me, as I said, because I haven't got the best of the number, but interested to see what sort of same gamers people do cook for that one.
There's going to be some fun same-game multis. And when I break this one down, the only logical play is the Panthers. It's that simple. You just couldn't convince me to jump on the Roosters. And the reason is they leaked 26 points against the Dragons and then 48 in the Knights. Now, that was in the preseason challenge. But they did back that up by conceding 50 points in the opening round to the Broncos whilst at home. Now, typically, I don't like to read too much into preseason form. We don't see the best 17 out there. There's often tinkering by the coaches, unless there's a clear trend. And there's a clear trend here, and that's the case where they are leaking points with their best team, with their reserve grade players. It doesn't matter. This Roosters side, when it was at its best in the 2018-2019, relied on experience and it relied on defense. In a way, it's almost as if this current Roosters roster has lost their DNA or lost their identity, rather, who they are. They're not sure. And there's so many question marks that if I was going to bet on this one, the only thing I could do is Panthers and have fun with some try scorers. I don't think you can go wrong there, as opposed to, backing the Roosters in this one. For the Panthers, as you said, it is their first home game at the new CommBank Stadium. That is their new home stadium this year, guys, with Penrith Park getting redeveloped. So I do expect them to set a tone here early. Their record at Penrith Park was so formidable since 2020 that I think that they'll want to do something similar here at CommBank. Not only team-wise, but when you look at the larger picture, they're anticipated to lose something like $20 million not playing at home. So they'll want to, the whole club will really want a big result here to convince Penrith fans that it is worth the trek consistently whilst their stadium's under development. So my tip here, I had Panthers cover their line. Now it's up to 22. I probably can't go. If I had to go Winnie, I could only play the Panthers at the line, but it's a bit too large for me. So I'm happy to leave out.
Just to put you on the spot, how high does the line have to get where you'd put your hard-earned on the Roosters?
Oh, 24.5, 4 converted tries. And I'd be banking on the Penrith Panthers kind of slacking off a little bit in the last 15, 20. But this Penrith side, if anything, we see them put sides to the sword in the last 20. They don't typically take their foot off like Manly did and like the Storm did, for example, last round. So, yeah, probably 24.5. Where would you be at?
Yeah, similar as well. And the thing is, what's in the Roosters' favour is you actually don't historically get as many blowouts early in the year. But the fact that there were a few in round one, I think is actually baked into this line, that people aren't afraid of the high line because you had 4 teams won 20 plus last round. And this is the most logical candidate to be a 5th side this season.
Yep, experience wins footy games. If you look at the Penrith Panthers lineup and their experience, then compare it to the Roosters, it's really difficult to land on them for any sort of bet or play in this one. Game 4, Dragons host the Bunnies, Saturday 3 p.m. We're at Wynn Stadium in Wollongong. Line was set -6.5 against the Dragons, and that has not moved. Blake Laurie returns for them, and Ryan Couchman is, of course, out with the ACL. For the Bunnies, a few changes as well. Jack Whiten suspended, so Fletcher Myers moves into the centres. Bailey Bentley-Hape debuts on the wing for Munro, and Jamie Humphries remains at halfback. Now, these sides only met once last year, and the Dragons did win that as an underdog by 14. They did defeat them in the Charity Shield also, if you want to include that. And it's an interesting game, Wendy, because from both sides here, there are players that have played on either side of the jersey for this one. So break it down for us, mate. Who have you got in this one and why?
So Laurie's an important addition. The Couchman ACL is heartbreaking for a young, promising player. Sloan is in the reserves. You've got to find him a spot in this lineup for me. And then with the Bunnies missing Whiten and Munro, those are substantial losses for your back line. Call it a revenge game for Lockie Ilias and Damien Cook. The Dragons met, I thought, quite a lethal Dogs side on Saturday. So I can forgive being outclassed because it was what I expected, and that there was a best bet there in that game against the Dragons. The Rabbitohs won, but they also just outlasted a slightly dishevelled Dolphins. So I thought the Red V could be a good spot here, but the market well and truly recognises that, making the line 6.5. This is one you said before with the Knights, you've got to exercise restraint when the line goes a little bit outside your comfort zone. And for me, I'd be laying the points with the Dragons if it was under 6, but at 6.5, I'm happy to let it pass because Bennett will still play into the whole you've been written off by everybody for South. So that's the public and the pundits. Like, the public knows that the Bunnies won last week and the Dragons lost, but they're also educated enough to know that this season the Dragons probably got a brighter outlook. However, the Bunnies are capable of a surprise here. And the same reasoning I had against St. George last week, they won't be a finished product this early in the year. So happy enough to let it pass by.
I'm with you on the fact that the Dogs were, pretty red hot in that game, and you can forgive the Dragons. Where I mix it up on this game is, on the other hand, the Bunnies did compete for the full 80 minutes. They weren't as impressive by any means, but they did compete for the full 80. And so I wonder where the Bulldogs allowed the Dragons to get back in the game. Could the Bunnies hold them off in this one? And for me, when I broke it down, I just had too many variables and question marks because we did see vastly different games from both of them in round one. So I went to as simple as it's going to come down to who wants this more. And I think this is a game that, as you said, will have a personal feel. mainly for Lachlan Ilias and Damien Cook. Now, the Bunnies won last round. I felt it was through sheer individual effort and grit. I don't think they were clicking too much as a team, but there were some really good individual standouts. That won't be possible in this week. I think they'll need to gel a little bit more as a team. And the Bunnies do have a more powerful forward pack. So it is possible they get on top early here of a Dragons side who we kind of all acknowledged after that Bulldogs game, they do look short a middle forward or two. For that reason, I am leaning towards the Dragons, but I think if I had to play this on Winnie, I'd look at either side 1 to 12, just because it does have that personal feel to it. I can see either side kind of fighting right into the end and not letting themselves get blown out. So either side 1 to 12 for me, and this one I think can be a tight one. Alrighty, game 5. Cowboys host the Sharks Saturday, 5:30 p.m. We're at Queensland Country Bank Stadium in Townsville. The line was set at -7.5 against the Sharkies. That has now moved to 8.5. My apologies, I messed the graphic up for this one, so we will not have that on screen. For the Sharks, no changes for them. Kai O'Donnell comes in for the Cowboys, and there's no reported injury, but Jeremiah Nanai has been left out of the side for his inclusion. So we will have to have a closer look there and see what happened. Now, these sides met twice last year, Winnie. They went 1-1, both winning at their respective home venue against each other. But outside of the Cowboys' win last year in Townsville, they are actually 1 from 13 against the Sharks recently. So do you think the Sharks can extend their dominance here, or do you reckon Cowboys can get one back?
Certainly, there's a narrative that the Sharks own the Cowboys. I know if you dig a little deeper into it, the Sharks always seem to have met the Cows right after an Origin game, and the Sharkies in recent years have had barely any Origin reps, and the Cowboys, since getting good in 2022, have had like 6 or 7 players involved, and that, it was not a fair fight. But there's something to be said. Both sides were closer to full strength in the finals last year, where the Sharkies blitzed North Queensland. And understandably, Cronulla's a solid favourite in this one. And I'm not just saying this because it was my only losing bet this year, but Cronulla easily could have beaten Penrith in round 1. And I think the Sharks are well aware that just replicating an effort like that gets the 2 points on the majority of occasions. So the same 1 to 17 remains for the Sharkies. As for the Cowboys, there are great reasons for concern after one game. I am willing to give some benefit of the doubt. Like, I won't write off North Queensland and say that team's nowhere near finals footy. I do feel like North Queensland's heads were spinning after missing the start in that game and just couldn't arrest control back. Taumalolo, if he's good to go, could help off the bench. But it is curious to me, how can you drop Nane? Is it a message from Payton about effort? You need all hands on deck, especially a talented player like him, when on the other side they've got Olakuatu as an answer. And we said it, that's the hottest seat of all 17 coaches for Toddy. So he's going to really need a response. And it didn't sound like he had, Todd Payton, all the answers in his presser either. Though I do think the conditions will help suit North Queensland early in the year, playing at home, even in the evening. The humidity gets opposing sides, and the sweat is actually can make the ball slipperier than a game played in the rain. And if the Cowboys are more used to those conditions, they can keep this a bit closer. I'm not going to play Cronulla. They're too obvious of a favourite. And I just want to make this point. I'm sure I say it every year, but some people might be wondering, why do I always talk about not wanting to play the obvious side? What's wrong with an obvious winner? And it's just in my experience doing this for many years, the bookies don't shell out on too many of those. And if everyone is on the same side, the line really does build that in, and the line is going to be greater to overcome. And long term, I know you can certainly win your fair share of them. You can win close to half the time taking a really public, obvious side. But I have not seen anyone like long term make a profit, make hay backing the side that Joe down the pub is backing, because Joe down the pub is not a profitable punter. The Cowboys, therefore, are the sharp side because they've already been written off by some people, and it's only round 2. And you love to play a team that's coming home off a humbling defeat, completely focused, and capable of a great deal more than we saw on Saturday. You still know what the Cowboys are capable of, but I'm not confident enough in them because it just circles back to the fact that I hold such a high opinion of Cronulla, who are still stinging off a defeat, want to register their first win. So sort of reasons why I might like both sides in this one is why I haven't played it.
Well, let me start with Joe. Hopefully he is tuning in. He can get a piece of the best bets this week because, that was a stray there. Poor old Joe at the pub. But one thing we know about both of these sides, there is points in them. So when I first saw this game and I saw it was in Townsville in an afternoon, I immediately thought overs. But I'll just check the forecast to double check. It says 35% chance of rain. Now, if this is a fast track with clear weather conditions, I would prefer the Sharks. I think if it does rain, it probably brings the Cowboys more into it. But I also feel the Sharks forward pack will get over them for the reason of Adam Fanua-Blake being their leader this year. Someone like Braden Hamlin-Uele has some great players for the Newtown Jets nipping at his heels to get into that side. And Thomas Hazelton, fresh off re-signing, he could be a chance for a meat player. He always is off the bench. So I feel like even if it does rain and it turns into a middle battle, I still prefer the Sharks there. Now, I know people will look to the Cowboys being at home, and we did say earlier that you want to set the tone earlier in the year, but they only have won one of their last 6 games at Townsville. So it's certainly an area that they're not really dominating there at all by any means. So my tip here would be the Sharks. As for a marginal way to play them, with the weather unknown, I'm hesitant to predict too much at this stage. But if I have to give you a winner, I believe the Sharkies will win this game.
No offense to Joe. Just while I think of it, let's do a quick stock take. Who's he going to be on this week? Probably the Knights on Thursday. Let's leave out the contentious ones and let's say Joe's all over Manly for sure. He's all over the Panthers. He's all over the Sharks in this one, and followed by the Broncos, which I think is the next game we're getting to, followed by the Bulldogs. So there's sort of 6 plays. We can come back and see how Joe would have done on his 6 best bets there. That'd be the most obvious sides, and not coincidentally, I'm on none of those.
I reckon if I know Joe, and I don't know Joe, but if I did know Joe, he would.
We all know Joe.
We all know Joe. He will bet Panthers 13 plus with Brian Toto try and pretend it's like the greatest multi God ever invented. If I know a Joe, that's what he'd be playing in this round. Alrighty, game 6. Raiders host the Broncos Saturday 7:35 p.m. We're at GIO Stadium in Canberra. Line was set at -12.5 against the Broncos, and that hasn't changed since team lists. There's no changes to their lineup. For the Raiders, they are short Joseph Tarpany. He's suspended, so they shuffle their forward pack, and Matty Nicholson comes in for debut. These sides met once last year when he was at Suncorp, and the Broncos ran out big winners by 24 points. Now, I loved what the Raiders did in Las Vegas, but I do feel they're going to struggle with consistency this year just because they are a young side, and the Broncos are red hot at the moment. So when you break this one down, how do you play it?
Well, this is the first clash where we get 2 undefeated teams. As in every other game, it was 1 winner, 1 loser from the week before. But more than that, these were both highly impressive victors in week 1. However, losing Tapine and Savage were 2 of the Raiders' best. Those are tough losses for Sticky. Maguire rewards the same 17 for Brisbane's second road trip. That Canberra side, if they play how they did in the opener, they do not deserve to be 12.5-point underdogs at home. But you have to add that disclaimer that, to me, New Zealand was so poor, probably lose to nearly anyone in the comp by a decent margin as well. You can say the same about ineptitude in regards to the Roosters, which does that mean that Brisbane looked a little bit too good? That certainly could be true, but I won't go against Brisbane, getting back to my point in the season preview and round 1 preview that I would wager the Broncos are the fittest team in the competition right now, based on the pre-season and reports out of that and what we could have easily predicted. So I have a slight lean to the green machine with the 12.5. But it's another factor is that I think the Raiders love to play some of these warm weather sides in the middle of winter. It's a little bit of a shame for the Raiders when you get a side like Brisbane. It's going to be a lot more mild in round 2. And then also just the simplistic looking at the rosters player for player, I feel like Canberra could get outclassed, especially without Tapine. Haas and Carrigan get over the top, and the highlight makers on the outside of, well, pick your poison. Ben Hunt on the left, Reno on the right, Walsh sweeping whichever side he likes to look of, and the highlight makers on the outside doing the rest. Easy to see Brisbane winning comfortably as well.
Look, I loved what Ricky Stuart was able to do for this side in Las Vegas. After an early distraction, he got them focused, he got them ready. And in a way, whilst Joseph Tarpany, there couldn't be a bigger loss for the Raiders, I actually think he'll be able to do that again here. He will really challenge the rest of his side to step up in Tarpany's absence, and they have the right players to do so. They've got young, exciting forwards like Ata Mariota, veterans like Josh Papali'i, and they also have a lot of defensive forwards, such as Morgan Smithy, Zach Hosking. These aren't guys that are going to, and Matty Nicholson, I should add, off the bench. These aren't guys that are going to match it tit for tat with Payne Haas and Patrick Carrigan, but they might have enough in the tank to defend them and not allow them to get that ascendancy through the middle like they were able to against the Roosters. It's their first home game this year. I expect Ricky will have them with one of their stronger showings without fatigue in their game. Now, all that being said, it is really hard to fade the Broncos at present. They started last year with 2 wins from their first 5, and under Madge, I wouldn't be shocked at all if they go 5 from 5 this year, just given his reputation for tough pre-seasons and how fit they looked, like you said, against the Roosters. But I still think all that considered, there's a small chance here the Raiders spoil the party at home. And the Broncos just, after a huge week, start to look a little bit too far ahead. Whereas this Raiders side, I believe Ricky Stewart will have them squarely focused, and he needs to without their best player in Joseph Tarpany. Xavier Savage, also a tough loss there. So my prediction this one would actually be Raiders at the line. I think they're a small chance to win. Broncos 1-12 is certainly another way to play this. I expect the 13-plus market to be much more preferred by punters. But I think the Green Machine can just stir the pot up a little bit here and bring the Broncos back to reality. So if I had to play it, I like them at the line of 12.5. Alrighty, Game 7. Eels host the Tigers Sunday at 4:05 p.m. CommBank Stadium. Line was set at -2.5 against the Tigers. That's now moved to -3.5 since team lists because they get Appy Coruscant, Jareem Buller, and Stafford Toaback. For the Eels, some big changes. Sean Lane returns. Kalmatua Lungi is out. Jordan Samrani debuts on the wing. That means Jake Tungo is out. And Kitione Kartonga comes to the bench with Charlie Geimer out. Now, these sides met twice last year, Winnie. They went 1-1 respectively. But importantly, it is a Spoon Bowl rematch where the Eels won 60 points to 26. So I need to know, can the Tigers get revenge in what they weren't able to do in the Spoon Bowl last year?
It certainly can. To borrow a phrase of yours, Clarkey, here's where it gets interesting. To me, this is the lowest line of the weekend. And the first game that I looked at that actually made me pause and go, who should be favourite here? We got the Moses news 7 days ago coming to us as a surprise, shifting that line 6 points instantly, but the Storm closed closer to a 20-point favourite, so the line shifted like 10 points. And that wasn't bad enough for one game, and we speculated maybe Moses is close, but you keep him out of the game, you're likely to lose anyway. No, it gets worse. Out for 6 weeks. So it's Volkman and Brown again in the halves for the Eels, and Riles finds his team down 46-6 in his first game with the record books beckoning. As I said before, some solace for the Eels in the fact they avoided total annihilation and humiliation, I suppose, by actually winning the second stanza. Still lost the game by, 38 points in the end. The second half was the undoing for the Tigers. They led 8-0 intermission, but West couldn't add to their total after that. Coruscant and Buller will aid in that significantly. The Tigers, I still think will need a little bit more time to find their perfect playing style around Jerome, but that's similar for what you can say about Para. How many games are the Eels missing at fullback and halfback? It's got to be over 500 games of experience since last year. It's a lot on the shoulders of the $13 million man. Overall, it's a pretty evenly matched contest for mine. I think the West look a little better list at this point, but then I counteract by Para playing at home in front of their home fans. And I think it should be a free-flowing game, much more so than what West Knights was. And this is, of course, played early afternoon. So if I had to lean, I'll lean to Para catching the points. Or I was looking at a Para team total over. I just couldn't quite find one where I felt gave us a big enough edge. So I think this one is anybody's game. I guess you're pressing me for a head-to-head winner. I agree the Tigers should be a slight favourite, but maybe it's Tigers by 1 or 2.
Here's the thing for me. I would agree with you, and I would play the Eels if I had to in this one. But how does this Dylan Brown news affect this Eels side mentally? They've got a new coach, new systems they're trying to work out, and they're trying to find some belief together as a roster that they can come back after being belted significantly in round 1. in amongst all of that, all of a sudden, your key $1 million man says, you know what, I'm out. He didn't even really give the systems a chance under Jason Riles before he made that decision. So I just wonder, and although we can kind of rationalize it as fans and see that he took it for the money and it was such a great deal, ultimately it probably wouldn't have mattered. As a teammate and as someone who probably, sweat, blood, tears, whatever you want to say in the preseason with him, you'd have to feel a little bit off that. Meanwhile, Lachlan Galvin, his management have told the Tigers, hey, we're going to November 1st this year. We want to receive offers. And someone commented on Lachlan Galvin's post saying, come home to the Eels. We know he was a big Eels fan growing up, and he was a big reason they beat them on Easter Monday a few years ago. And he liked the comment. He liked the comment of the fans saying, come back home. We want to see you back in an Eels jersey. So whilst I expect Brown to, and the Eels to maybe be a little bit off with that news, Lachlan Galvin will be firing, particularly in a spine where Jareem Buller and Api Coruscant come back. Those are some key returns that we can't stress enough. Unlike the Eels, although the Tigers lost in round one, I think they still take confidence from it. They had a great first half. Let's build on it, boys. Let's play better in the second half this time. I also think the Eels are short a middle forward this year, having lost Regan Campbell-Gillard. We saw that against the Storm. They steamrolled him up the middle. Terrell May will have a huge game here, and I think he can really lead this Tigers forward pack. When I ultimately put the bow on this breakdown, I think it's going to come down to the coaching staff from the Tigers, looking the players in the eyes and saying, look what happened last round. And they're not going to use the word spoon bowl, but look what happened in the spoon bowl last year. And this is your chance to show some improvement and put some pride back in that jersey. Go out there and get the win for our fans. So for that reason, I've got Tigers at the line. I can see them winning this by at least 4 points, if I'm absolutely honest.
Just a little bit more contract talk, as Barney comments there. Wait till November 1 then, mate, based on what you've said. Parramatta offers Lockie Galvin 10 years, $13.1 million. You can see it now as the replacement. And Barney mentioning the outs, the player options, that was one thing we didn't cover with Brown. He was actually under contract for several more years, but every second year had a player option. I know it is silly giving a player that option because they can essentially hit free agency. In the Eels' defense, I just think the fact that Dylan Brown was on $1.1 million a year, they felt, oh yeah, there's an option there, but he's not going to be playing so good that he wants to get out of 1.1. That's already so well paid. And if Dylan Brown's playing so well that he's better than 1.1 a season, that's good for us. And somehow Dylan Brown wasn't playing like that outstanding, but actually did command more. So it worked out badly, but I just think Parramatta couldn't foresee a guy walking away from $1.1 million a year for the next 5 years, which is what Brown stood to earn. But that's why this contract was such a shock.
Yeah, and ultimately people forget as well that Mitchell Moses recently was in the same situation with release clauses. Dylan Brown went to the Eels and said, hey, I'll remove the clauses. Can you give me a pay rise? And the Eels said no. Mitchell Moses did the same, and they said, yes, we can do that for you, Mitch. So maybe he felt a little bit slighted there as well. Who knows? But it's going to be such an interesting situation to watch play out over the next few years. Game 8, Bulldogs host the Titans Saturdays, 6:15 p.m. We're at Belmore Sports Ground. The line was set at -8.5 against the Doggies, and there's been no change since teamless. Josh Curran comes back in them from suspension. Harry Hayes drops off the bench. And for the Titans, Tino Fa'asuamaleaui moves to lock. Regan Campbell-Gillard and Mweki Fotuaika start at prop. Now, these sides only met once last year when it was almost in the corresponding round. It was round 3. This is round 2. And the Bulldogs ran out 32-0 winners. But it was not only a disastrous day for the Titans in that respect, it was also the game Tino tore his ACL. But you think that maybe if the Titans can't turn their fortunes here, they can keep the Bulldogs to a respectable score and keep the total down?
I do. That was certainly not a happy visit. I had the same note. Your season basically ended before it started in that game there. It's a stitch up as well, I think, for the Titans getting the round 1 bye, followed by playing Sunday night. You're not really getting any advantages of a long turnover, and you'll be on a shorter one next week. So we talked about how there'll be some demons, and it was at Belmore as well, that game between Titans Bulldogs, I'm pretty sure. So some demons to vanquish for the Titans. Can it be a new beginning? It's going to be the new era with Brimson and Jaden Campbell in the halves. And you look at the intent of the Titans with Tino, Mo, and RCG all starting. I think that gives a clear size advantage to the Travellers. So playing at night, can they overpower the Bulldogs? As we observed last week with Canterbury, though, it's not the size of the dog in the fight. It's the fight in the dog and the mobility and motor of Ciraldo's pack allows them to dominate games with their line speed rather than with size or power. And I can see that shrinking the space that the Titans need to operate their offense. I also wasn't like totally convinced by the Bulldogs' attack. I know that will sound silly because at one point the Dogs had a commanding 28-6 lead, but I do feel St George was a little shell-shocked in the middle period and conceded some soft tries. I don't think the Dogs score that easily every week. And I look at the Titans, if they're to be any sort of legitimate threat or return to the finals, you're going to have to increase your toughness and your togetherness because the flair is going to be there, but you've got to be able to restrict the opponent. So I can sort of see defensive focus being key to both teams before they earn the right to spread the ball to their speed men. Titans don't score as many away from home either because they love that lightning C-bus surface. I mentioned the new halves combo. So that's why I'm playing unders on what's a reasonably high total. 46.5 was the best bet. What are you grinning like a Cheshire cat for?
Dude, someone's commented on YouTube with some exclusive mail. Septile118. He's got mail that Matt Bird's not getting much sleep lately because he's been playing the Marvel iPhone game at 3 a.m. the other night. It's come from his mate, so it has to be true. It has to be true. And Matt Burton was one of their best players last round with his kicking game. So I expect his kicking game to be a little bit off. Maybe, his kicks won't go as far because he'll be up. And he now adds real punters know about the video game fade. When I saw that, if I disrupted you, I just couldn't help but laugh. It was silly and funny, and it was a good one. The Titans. Now, they started their 2024 campaign 0-6. And it's as clear as anything that cannot reoccur this year. And I don't think it will under Des Hasler. If one thing we know about Des Hasler last year, he was able to get the Titans up in important spots. They won over every Queensland team. They had some good wins at home. The Warriors game, for example, was a bounce back after 2 poor performances. So he was able to get them up inconsistently. And I think that this will be a game where he will be able to get them up just based on what happened last year with the start to their season. Last week for the Bulldogs, I thought they were able to snatch momentum against a Dragons side who is missing big forwards and missing middle forwards as a whole. I don't think they can do that against the Titans. I don't think they can rely on that. You have 3 powerful middle forwards in Campbell, Gillard, Fodawaker, and Tino up against a smaller Bulldogs pack here. And if they are able to get a roll on and get those post-contact meters and quicker play the balls by nature of Bulldogs having a smaller forward pack, that's what will allow AJ Brimson, Jaden Campbell, Keanu Kennedy to get creative and start scoring some points for the Titans here. So I just think where the Bulldogs were at their best last week, they won't be able to rely on that this week against my Titans. Additionally to that, the Bulldogs have not opened a season with consecutive wins since 2016. So we're going on almost 10 years where that consistency has been missing to their game. And I do feel the Titans can cover that line. I really do think they can. And when I look for a try scorer, given the fact that Tuipulotu scored 3 times for the Dragons last week and gave us 3 cash fortnight emojis after scoring, you got to back a Lofiana Khan-Pereira in 44 games, 44 tries. If there's a hat-trick to the left winger last week, have to think AKP will cross there. So my tip here for this game is Titans at the line and a Lofiana Khan-Pereira anytime try scorer, which will lead us into Clarkey's Collect Winnie. I've got 3 legs and a multi this week, guys. I've gone conservative again just to build that bank up a little bit for us, hopefully. So I've gone Panthers minus 9.5. I do believe that they will be more than good enough to win by double digits against the Roosters. I've got Raiders plus 18.5. Like I said, guys, I just feel they'll be up for the fight, and I don't see them getting blown out by more than 3 converted tries. And I've got the same line for my Titans, plus 18.5. Same reason again. And this game means a lot to us. I don't see us getting blown out. Now, I'm giving us plenty of room there in the margins. So it is a smaller bet. It only pays $2.21 on Better. But I think at the start of the season, Winnie, I want to be a little bit more cautious and, just try to build up the bank like I did last year before I go for more of the creative plays like we saw on Origin. So, again, guys, Panthers minus 9.5, Raiders and Titans both plus 18.5. That pays $2.21 on Better for Clarkey's Collect for round 2.
Paste that in the comments if you can, mate, if you can copy paste it. You are 1-1 this year and both paying over $2, so you are in a little bit of profit, and that's after plus 15 units last week, so no one can knock your process. I also gave out a value winner last week with the mixed matchup, which, as I explained this year, I won't have time to cook it, negotiate it in the show prep because it could get rushed. But it is always available under the Top Sport Rugby League markets leading into the round. And I posted it in the group as well, along with the best bet summaries. And if you missed last week, we got a $2.50 winner as easy as you like. It was the Bulldogs who put on 28 points, and I had them to outscore Newcastle. And Newcastle actually had a higher team total. So we're expected to score more points, but Newcastle only managed 10, despite the fact they did win 2. So my next mixed matchup will be out Wednesday or Thursday at the latest. Clarkey's Collect is on the screen. We appreciate your company. We went over the hour mark. We did shoehorn in that bonus segment that was very topical. That is the talk of the town in the rugby league world. So let us know what you thought around our opinions on the massive Brown contract as well as everything we've said about the 8 games for this week. Thanks, guys. Have a great week. We'll catch you Sunday for the recap. Good luck. Lego.